February 26th in the year 2010. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television, and it is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Paul LaMastra, who here at the Universal Studios, and this is for the Archive of American Television and ACE.
I'm thrilled.
Oh, good. So we're going to start right from the beginning.
All right.
Let's talk about your name at birth.
My name at birth was Alfonso LaMastra. In fact, Mike Kahn on Sunday night didn't speak anything about my editing. He was co-presenter with Dorothea Petrie, and he resurrected stuff that I had forgotten. I've been Paul since 1977, and was Alan for about 12 years, but it never fit. I hated the name Alfonso. Ethnic just was not in the 50s and 60s. Now I kind of like it, and people have said you should, retake that name. But oh my God, no! Everything's changed now, so I'm going to leave it the way it is.
So where did Paul come from?
Paul was my middle name at confirmation or bar mitzvah, and in 1977, I was with a psychotherapist, and he said, "Where'd you get the middle name Paul?" And I relived finally having my own identity, And I said, Ralph, today I'm going to change my name. And I did. I started the process. But it's rough. I just had problems about 2 months ago. Not even trying to withdraw money from an account, but just trying to get a better rate of interest. And this idiot said, "Well, where's Alan?" I said, "I've never been legally Alan. I was legally Alfonso, and then I'm legally Paul now." And he wouldn't let me transfer funds from one account into a new one, I was so incensed. And I told him, I said, "God damn you to hell. I've been Paul for, since 77. And I went to another branch with my Social Security, 2 different Social Security cards and all of this stuff, And the woman said, "Oh, all you need to do is fill out a name change." And this guy at the Studio City branch was saying, "Oh, you need a court order," and all this nonsense. It's just ridiculous.
So what have been your names in your credits that you've had over the years?
What have they been? Well, I remember they've been, the first feature I ever co-edited, it was Alfonso Paul LaMastra. It was a thing called Chrome and Hot Leather for American International. They wanted a 92-minute movie. I was working for nothing and co-edited this thing, and we'd make jokes about it and say, "Chrome and Hot Leather, a decorator's dream," or "Chrome and Hot Leather, bind us together." I did meet Marvin Gaye. He was one of the Green Berets in the group, and he'd come into the editing room and look over my shoulder, and a lot of Bill Smith. Do you remember these names? They were all famous bikers, in the American International, whatever, coterie or zoo or whatever you want to call it,
Okay,
what was your question?
I was asking you the names that you have credits.
Oh, yeah. There was Alfonso Paul, then there was Alan P., and then Alan Paul. And then Ed Friendly, God bless rest his soul, was so funny. He'd say, when I changed it to Paul Frederick, he said, "What the hell is this?" And I said, "Well, this is it," And he whenever he'd see me, he'd say, whatever the hell your name is, But he was a wonderful guy in many ways, and I did my first 6 movies or so for him.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. So when were you born?
March 29, 1941.
And where?
In Elizabeth, New Jersey, but the 122 East 2nd Street, I was conceived there. That's why I mentioned that in the presentation on Sunday. I happened to find my mom's citizenship papers. And, I had an older brother that passed away at the age of 12. And Mom was a mess. She was down to like 90 pounds. And I don't think they were commingling during that period. when he was dying. But suddenly, on the day that she became a citizen, by golly, I think they made it, because I was born 9 months later. So it was amazing. I mean, this is a new revelation for me. I called my sister in New Jersey immediately. I said, bro, well, you'll never guess. But, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little about your parents. What were their names and what did they do?
My father's name was Federico, and my mother's name was Ignazia, which is the Italian feminine of Ignatius. But when they moved to New Jersey, to an all-Irish German neighborhood, all the folks started in church and everything and started calling her Nancy. So it stuck, you know. And in fact, her namesake, my second oldest niece, is named Nancy in her honor. I was born on Route 1, about 10 feet from the outside lane. Noise does not bother me at all. I slept through 2 of my sister's pregnancies when I was supposed to bring her to the hospital. The trucks would be roaring by. My father had a bar. My bedroom was above the jukebox, so it was a Wurlitzer bubbler, one of which I still have in my den at home, and it works. And that backbeat was constantly there, you know, and it was like a lullaby. You know, it just lulled me to sleep, and it was okay. You know, they worked hard. My father's older sister told him, Fred, he was a shoemaker, he was an apprentice shoemaker at the age of 7. He was in the Italian army in World War I. And I have to keep telling people, no, Italy was an ally in World War I. They weren't on the other side, you know. But I have all kinds of photos of him in his uniform from those days. And I often wonder who's going to appreciate it when I'm gone, you know. But it's the last connection to the 19th century, because Queen Victoria was still alive when he was born. You know, so I love history. I've always loved history. Then I remember I was an assistant editor on Sheila Levine. Do you remember that movie?
Oh, yeah.
Directed by Sid Fury? And I wanted to see how my name looked in hot pink and in French, so I changed it to Alain, A-L-A-I-N. You know?
Is that what it ended up in the film as?
Yeah, on the credits of Sheila Levine, and you know, the end credits, it does say Alain LaMastra. You know.
Well, going back to your early years, what kind of kid were you? What hobbies did you have, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
I loved movies. Absolutely loved movies. I would go down to the Elizabeth book. If you ever came to the house, you'd see I don't have 2 square inches of space left. It's all movie posters. You know, I would go down to the Elizabeth Book Exchange on rainy Saturday mornings, and there was a guy with a malformed hand, and I'd say, any old movie magazines? And he'd look at me and kind of crawl to the back and come out with stacks of these things from the 30s, 40s, and early 50s, and I still have a lot of them. I've sold a lot of them on eBay. You know, but I'd go home and I'd pour through them. I mean, one of the greatest tragedies of my life was when my folks moved to Florida in 1972, and they told me they were going to throw away my Life magazine collection. I said, no, and I was out here by that time, so I had to make a special trip east. And I couldn't save 15, 16 years of Life magazine, so I just tore out all the movie ads and the sections pertaining to film and the covers pertaining to film, and I did some crazy things. You know, I loved Loretta Young as a child, and I remember writing her a letter, and I said, "You're so Catholic. Why don't you come to Mass on Elizabeth, and Mom will cook this incredible spaghetti dinner?" I never got an answer, you know, but I was, you know, optimistic about it. I remember writing a fan letter to Veronica Lake. She was doing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in summer stock in North Jersey. Never got an answer, you know. But I did get an answer to a letter I wrote to Gene Kelly, and that changed my life. But I'm jumping ahead, so you pull me back.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to pull you back a little bit. What attracted you to film at such a young age?
Well, like I said in my speech, what did I say? I said my earliest screen memories were a beautiful brunette singing a lullaby, two crazy sailors dancing on beds. And I remember the theater. My dad took my sister and I to see that movie. I didn't know the name of the movie. I didn't know the name of the people for years until they came on the early show on CBS in New York, in the New York metro area. But, and then I remember going to the Strand, which was a theater they tore down to build the New Jersey Turnpike, with my sister, and she was always saddled with squirming excess baggage, me. And we watched this young girl dig a hole in dry ground from which water miraculously flowed. And I just admired the energy and the enthusiasm they put into their deeds, making all things perfect and possible. And those were lessons, actually, that I tried to apply in my career and in life with mixed results. This is almost a replay of what I said on Sunday night, because that mixed results line got a laugh, and I didn't think it was going to get a laugh, but it did. But I loved film, and I loved the magic of it, and
were you aware of the components of film? Did you?
It's funny you should mention that, because my first, and I didn't put this in the speech, so this is new. First time I was aware of editing was in a Betty Grable musical, and she tapped and skipped behind a New York skyline. I think the movie was Call Me Mister. In 1949 or 1950, I was 8 or 9 years old. And they came out the other end in different costumes. I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Something happened. And that was my first awareness of editing. But, I had to do what first-generation children of immigrants were forced to do. And that was go for the career, go for the profession. Papa and Mama wanted desperately for me to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, Indian chief, and they really tried to force me into that venue, So in high school, I took German instead of French, and always science things, and that was totally boring to me.
What did you want to be? Did you know?
I wanted to be a piano player in the worst way. I screamed for a piano when I was about 5 or 6 years old. Papa said we didn't have the room, so they gave me an accordion. And I kicked the accordion, and he kicked me. But I took it for 7 years. And I used to play on the stage with... at that same theater, the Ritz, with DiZino's all-accordion band, and I had a couple of solos and stuff like that. I hated it. They used to call it the squeeze box, And the irony of that accordion was, in the early 70s, I was living up on Lake Hollywood Drive, and one of my roommates was going to have a garage sale. And I said, this is time. Let me get rid of this accordion. And I said, but Chuck, don't sell it for less than $60. Guess who bought it? Rudy Fair. Do you know who that is? The old head of post-production. He bought it, and I came home, and my roommate had sold it for $25. I said, Chuck, how could you do that? It's worth at least $100. So I called Rudy Fair's home, and I spoke to Mrs. Fair. She said, anytime you want it back. She said, we'll give it back to you. for whatever we paid for it.
Did you know who he was?
I knew who he was, at the time, and I sure as hell knew he could afford a hell of a lot more than $25 for a gorgeous accordion, but I let it lay, and now it's a lot of water under the bridge since then. So,
Bottle.
Get rid of it? Yep.
Let's talk a little about your education going forward.
Okay. Graduated Villanova with a bachelor's in history. Did my second semester junior year in Florence, Italy. Actually, it was so funny because I went over with a group from Syracuse University, 49 girls and 11 guys. And this one very, very wealthy, it was like Goodbye Columbus, very wealthy Jewish girl from South Orange, New Jersey, who I started dating in Florence. She told me that when she first saw my name, Alfonso LaMastra, she said, "Look, Ma, he's going back to find his roots," which was right, which was true, And we sailed over on the Christopher Columbus, which was kind of nice. It was the sister ship of the Andrea Doria. Do you remember the ship that sank? It was rammed by an icebreaker, Ruth Roman was on that ship. I remember that. And Judy traded me in for a genuine Italian within weeks of arriving in Florence. And it was a lovely experience, but it changed my life. I no longer wanted to be a lawyer. I had eliminated doctor, I had eliminated engineer by that time. I just wanted to change the world and make it safe, for it. And it was Kennedy time, and he was my idol. I loved that guy, and I just fell into the spirit of it. So I went to my guidance counselor at Villanova, and he said, you've been in Europe too recently, and your grades aren't good enough for a Fulbright, but why don't you try this? And he handed me a flyer for the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii, which Kennedy had just founded. And I applied. I wrote a 3-page curriculum vitae, which I read to my college roommate in the dorm. It was laughing like hell. I mean, it was just so altruistic. I sent it off, and we went home for Easter break. Came back, and there was my acceptance. Well, it took me about 10 seconds to write a letter saying I accept, but my father didn't know. That was probably April of '63. My dad didn't know and thought I was going to go to St. John's Law School in Brooklyn right up until August. I never told him. And he laid it out to me. He says, "You gonna go to law school?" in broken English. I said, "No, Pop, I'm going to the University of Hawaii." It was a 2-year scholarship, all expenses paid. Round trip air from Newark to Honolulu to whatever my choice of country was going to be. It ultimately ended up being Japan, a government expense, and I was going to be a diplomat. But there was something going on at that time called the Vietnam War. I don't know how to fire a gun. I don't know how to kill anybody. I just didn't want any part of it. And I remember, I still have it in a scrapbook, a headline from the Japan Times. My birthday, 1965, and it said, "Johnson sends first Marines to Vietnam." And I said, I've been deferred now for 6 years. Can't burn my draft card. Can't move to Canada. What the hell am I going to do? Well, I had been doing extra work and bit parts in Japanese movies. One of them turned...
In where?
In Tokyo. I was taking karate, and I overheard them talking about this Turkish guy who did all the foreign casting for Japanese movies. Toho and Shochiku, I think, was another one. Daihatsu or whatever. I can't remember the names of those companies. Toho, I do remember. And I said, where is he? Where is he? So I went in there and I just gave him a whole bunch of malarkey. And I said, yes, I've done many things in the States, And I do have photos of me taken off the screen, a TV screen, with subtitles yet. I played an American soldier warning Japanese newsmen that there's, ambush ahead and stuff like that on a road in Vietnam. And I was an extra in a movie. It was a cheap James Bond ripoff that became Woody Allen's What's Up, Tiger Lily? And it's crazy because years later, I'm sitting at the 4-Star Theater on Wilshire, and I said, gosh, I recognize that set. And sure enough, there I am, next couple cuts. And I said, and I talked to Mike Kahn about it. I was assisting him at that time on Hogan, or apprentice or assisting him on Hogan's Heroes. And I said, Mike, I'm going to, tell Woody, I'm going to write Woody a letter and tell him that my deal with Toho or whoever did not include foreign rights. So I want to be paid. He said, Paul, just, take a break. Give it a rest. But at lunchtime, about, years, a couple of years later, I went into one of those shops off of Hollywood Boulevard that have 8x10 glossies stacked to the ceilings. And I only had a few minutes. I picked up 4 stills. And the 5th was a shot of me from What's Up, Tiger Lily with the thing on the bottom. I gave it to Jenny. She didn't use it in the program, and I paid $25 for it. I would have paid $100 for it, But did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
No, that's just great. So you're in Japan. How did you come back stateside?
Well, the craziness is, like I said, I always loved Gene Kelly. I can remember the 2 Crazy Sailors dancing on beds were him and Sinatra in Anchors Away. And then I can remember with the family, we went and saw An American in Paris at Radio City Music Hall. And I kind of thought that he was the same person from like 5-6 years earlier. I didn't quite know. But then all those movies came on the early show. And I said, oh, my God, there they are, all my childhood memories. So instead of doing my homework one night, I bicycled, pedaled down to a theater, neighborhood theater in Honolulu to see An American in Paris for the upteenth time. I mean, this is pre-VHS or pre-any of this. You had to see it on a screen if you were going to see it at all. And I came back to the dorm and I wrote, instead of doing my homework, I wrote him a 3-page, single-spaced analysis of his style and talked about my family and all kinds of stuff. And I said, you've been such a great guy all of my life. I'd like to stop in Hollywood and buy you a beer. On my way back to Jersey, I was going to go home for 3 weeks before I went on a field study to Tokyo for 10 months. And the next morning, I bumped into a guy in the theater arts department at the U of H, and I told him what I had done, and his name was Stan. And he said, why don't you mail it to his home address? And I said, how do you know his home address? He said, because I used to date his daughter, Curry, at Swarthmore. And he says, it's 725 North Rodeo Drive. So I went back and readdressed the envelope. I got an answer in a week. This was April of '64. And he was here on the Universal lot at that time. He was between seasons or at the end of the run of the TV series Going My Way. Do you remember it? Kind of. It's heavy, bald, But he gave me 45 minutes of his time. And I left there, and I just knew internally that I didn't want to be a diplomat, that I wanted to be in the movies.
What did you talk about?
God, we talked about well, the big thing was that his girlfriend's name in American in Paris was Lisa. And I had a girlfriend in Florence, Italy, whose name was Lisa. And I said, I remember how I asked him, how difficult is it to get into the movie business? And he pointed out the window, and there were some kids from the mailroom making their deliveries. He says, that's where you have to start. And then and he autographed. I had a terrible photo that I had out of a theater arts magazine of him from Pal Joey, the Broadway show, and it's barely visible, but it's the first autograph that I ever received from him, and he autographed it. And it's in the dark area, but I still have the original. I mean, Universal actually had a gate that opened for people to walk through. There wasn't one of these things in 1964. And there was a studio pass waiting for me with his name. I got all of this stuff still. And we kept in touch. He critiqued my UCLA film project, which I have a copy of, which I have to have a couple of drinks to look at. It was an all-star. It was UCLA's first non-synchronized sound musical. Now, you go figure that. But the student body just loved it. I got great reviews. It was bits and pieces from all my favorite MGM musicals, a lot of which were Kelly's. And I choreographed, costumed, edited, directed, and then made the foolish mistake of also acting in it. That's what makes it real rough to look at. But he critiqued it, and by that time I was working in Paramount's sound effects department, and I could remember calling him at home, and he wasn't, so many of the tracks were his, but he didn't, come down heavy on me. And this is all pre-nostalgia. You got to remember that this is 6 years or 8 years before That's Entertainment. And, so basically I was always into old Hollywood, And Dorothea Petrie, God bless her, remembered a story I had told her. Now, if I'm jumping ahead, please let me know. But as she said in her co-presentation, she said he not only loved passionately his own movies, but everybody else's, and I was always trying to save. I remember I worked, the second job at Paramount was working in the film library.
What was the first job?
First job was in sound effects editing, reclaiming Phil Leader, when they would have to put like 393 feet of emptiness before a door knock, on a reel or glass clinks or whatever, or mag fill. And I got a chance to go to the music editors knew that Edna Bullock was one gal. She did all the Bonanza and High Chaparral music editing. So whenever David Rose was composing on the big stage at Glen, I could, go and visit, and be with Edna. And Paul Hager was a nice man at that time when he was a music editor. He turned out to be a #1 louse later, but I'll get into that if you want me to. But it was wonderful. David Rose, Neil Hefti, Henry Mancini, Marie Jarre. I saw them, scoring. Who did the score for Great Gatsby? I can't remember. But it was a beautiful score, and I'd have to go home and look at my vinyl, But it was a great learning process. And, in those days, if you showed a little bit of energy and enthusiasm, they wouldn't get rid of you during layoff. And, the lot was so empty at that time, you could fire a shotgun down the street and you wouldn't hit a soul, There was one movie, Arizona Bushwhackers. A.C. Lyles was producing. Had an all-star cast, that he had gotten for $9.98 a day or whatever. Will Penny was a beautiful movie, still is. It's one of my favorite westerns ever. Are you familiar with that? Charlton Heston, beautiful movie. Donald Pleasance, that was shooting. And it was fun seeing Reagan would come on the lot to get his hair cut by his old barber. And I never met John Wayne, but I used to run into one of his sons, Michael, at the Honey Wagon. Jan, didn't you work at Paramount in the 60s?
Yeah.
I figured as much. Excuse me, because you remember a little bit of this, It was great. But Hazel, at lunchtime I go through Hazel's books, and they had a rule. If the nitrate negative was deteriorating, they would automatically junk the positive. And there were a lot of, not too bright people working in the library who would just automatically dump the stuff, no matter what it was. I came back one day from lunch, and I said to this guy, Tony, what are you dumping today? He says, something from the early 30s. And I said, what? He said, something called Shanghai Express. I said, what? I said, have you touched the positive yet? I just got sweats and cold and chills and everything. He said, no, I haven't. I said, leave it alone. So for 30 years, I had 2,000 feet of Shanghai Express in my freezer. I broke it down into little rolls, by seeing. It was beautiful film. And then finally, I in the early part of this century, I think I needed, it was enough. It was time to let go. I donated all of my 16 millimeter prints to UCLA's archives. And then I said, I got to get rid of this too. And I gave it to UCLA's Film Preservation. I got a beautiful letter back from them, in addition to getting a nice tax write-off, But they said, thank you very much for your donation. You have probably given us the only existing original footage from the original nitrate shot, printed from the original nitrate negative of Lee Garms existing in the entire world. So it really made me feel good, And then later in 1974, I was assisting Rita Rowland on Once Is Not Enough. I was in and out of Paramount a few times, first as an apprentice, and then I went off, and Michael Kahn got me a job as a loop editor on a film that Universal released called The Activist, which was produced by Art and Joe Napoleon, husband and wife team. And they blew it up from 16 to 35. And then a friend of mine was working at Gerald Schnitzer Productions. Did you ever hear of them? Right across from the old Columbia on Sunset. Beautiful building with stages in the back. They produced documentaries and a lot of commercials. And they let Pat go during a lull in production, but they kept me. And then they started letting me edit the commercials. And I did this for about 6 weeks before I went into the boss. And I said, hey, what gives? I'm not insisting anymore. I'm editing, So they gave me a rain or shine salary, I call it. It was much more than an assistant's, but it was less than, it's about editor's scale, or maybe a few dollars less. But it lasted for a year, 7 months, and I was an apprentice editor. And here I am cutting commercials in a union house and collecting my benefits and, clocking up the hours. And, I was able to, buy a house with that money and stuff. And, it was a good gig for me. So this was in between being an apprentice at Paramount and then coming back. And then I was bartending a party for Ridge Walker, who was in the music. I can't remember his title in the music department. at Paramount. My friend, my best friend, she still is, Elizabeth Maffei. She was secretary and assistant to Lou Harris, who was head of the entire trailer department at Paramount in those years. And I can remember, Pauline showing us, I can't remember her last name, but she was the hostess at the Paramount Commissary. And the thing about the Paramount Commissary was they'd say, Hitler isn't dead, he's the chef at the Paramount Commissary. The food was so bad. But Pauline was still showing us the tables, and I gave Lou a little bit of hell, and I said, what are you doing for Liz? And he says, it was like the Godfather saying, shut up in your face, because I'm setting her up. And he did. He retired, and she became head of the trailer department or whatever was left, But she couldn't stand the politics at Paramount and finally moved to Warner's, and she retired about 2 or 3 years ago, and we're still buddies, I meandered, and I was going to tell you another story, but maybe I should wait for another question from you.
Well, you mentioned Michael Kahn, and one of the things you worked on with him was Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Oh, it was, I was by this time I was on my third job on the Paramount lot, film shipping, and that was horrendous. The library was wonderful. Hazel loved me. Everybody hated Hazel, but I loved her and she loved me, and we had a great in-like relationship. And I did an inventory. I think the Paramount at that time still had 1,600,000 feet of nitrate negative in their vaults. And I cataloged it all. Longhand, and she was just so impressed, that I could have had a job with her for life. But they moved me to shipping, and a guy by the name of Don Crosby, no relation to Bing, was a sound effects editor. So he said, what's a smart guy like you doing in shipping? Why don't you go over to Bing Crosby Productions, which is where Hogan's Heroes was being shot, on the Desilu Cahuenga lot. I hear they have an opening for an overscale apprentice. And I went over there, and I talked to Housley Stevenson, who was a nice man. He's since passed. And Jerry London was the supervising editor, and Michael was the second editor. Jerry was, within a very short time, about to jump to directing, and Michael was going to become the head editor on Hogan's. And it was a wonderful learning experience. Michael was so cute. He'd come into, we had the big console hot splicer, and we had to, razor them and everything. And Michael would come in and say, Paul, something's wrong here. These splices just seem to be coming apart. And he'd kind of pull on it ever so lightly. And the thing would say, sorry, Mike. But it was it was the beginning of a wonderful friendship, and we're still buddies. And he didn't even hesitate when I called him and asked him if he would be co-presenter, with Dorothea. And he would give me scenes to cut. But it was while I was assisting him on Eleanor and Franklin, and he was hired to do a Return of a Man Called Horse in Mexico. And I was going to clean up Eleanor and see it through the dub and make some directors and some ABC circle changes and stuff. And then I was going to go follow him to Mexico as his assistant. Well, it was, John Barry did the score for Eleanor. And I remember one cue was so incredibly inspirational. And by this time I had been in the union for 7.5 years, And the cue was so inspirational. And I remember there had been one executive at ABC that wanted me to cut some tests on a pilot And I said, no way. I said, the scoring is the gravy. I can sit back, relax, and listen to beautiful music, you know. But this cue was so beautiful that I just said, I don't want to be an assistant the rest of my life. And I went running back to this executive, and I said, are those tests still available? Let me cut them. Let me cut them. And they were for Ed Friendly, and the project was Young Pioneers. It was going to be a 2-hour MOW. And then I just kept badgering and pestering him like you can't believe, saying, you know, going down to his office. It was in the old writers' building at Fox, and I'd say, you know, please let me cut it. You know, please let me cut it. Talk to his associate, his assistant, Zita, and I'd say, Zita, if you can do anything for me. I was just so desperate, and I got the job. And I had to call Mike and say, Mike, I can't come down. And sometimes I think that I left Mike too soon. You know, I didn't learn enough from him. And there was so much to learn. He was such a disciplined creature, you know. I mean, just like a lawnmower, as far as, you know, at the Moviola, you know. And in those days, I mean, later in life when he started editing for Steven, he would have an entourage. But in those days, one person did it all, you know, had to do it all. And it was during my assisting days with him that I stopped eating lunch, you know, because there was no time. You know, he'd go off to lunch and he'd leave at 5 in the afternoon. And boy, the trim bins were a mess and everything. And he was so wonderful, though. He'd come into the room and he'd look at the trim boxes and he'd say, He said, the boxes are great. He said, but why is this line slowly going down, 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 down? I said, oh, Mike, for Christ's sake. I said, give me a break, you know, because, I would try, you know, you'd have a yardstick. But by the time you got to the end, things would slip and slide and everything. But it was an incredible learning process. I cut a lot of teases and tags on Hogan's, and whenever possible, I could go to the dubbing stage, you know, and watch them dub it, and it was just wonderful. I mean, later in life, I did develop a good ear, and there were some directors who really were bored or would rather be doing the New York Times crossword than listening to the dub. So, you know, basically, later in the 80s and 90s, I was dubbing shows. You know, I had a good ear, and I knew when things were missing. And I remember, you know, never forgiving Russ Tinsley for forgetting the bed springs in the episode 1 of Backstairs at the White House when Olivia Cole sits on her bed, and there were no bed springs. And I said, Russ, damn it, you know. And he never put them in. There should have been. There should have been. Some things you never forget. But
going back to Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the style of editing for that show. Was there a style?
Yeah, it was line, answer, line, answer, line, answer. It was all very, very rote. And Ed Feldman wanted it cut always the exact same way, you know, no variations. So whatever Jerry did, Michael did, you know. Yeah, and I guess that was the secret of comedy. Very few overlaps. But yet when Michael got into higher quality stuff, he became the king of overlaps and taught me the importance of overlaps. And I mean, to a point where I remember on one show I did this incredible, I loved playing stuff in reaction. You know, I mean, to the chagrin, and you know, you just don't do that to a writer-director combo who loves seeing every one of his lines on camera, on screen, you know. On one particular show, after I left early to do another miniseries. my co-editor had to completely and totally undo, what I thought was masterful editing. Back to Hogan's. Is there anything else I can tell you about Hogan's that you'd like to know? It was just fun. I mean, there was a deli that served downstairs from the cutting rooms that served the best pastrami sandwiches in Los Angeles, and we'd go up the street to the boulevard and get from C's. We'd get mince. Mike always loved his mince, chocolate covered mince. And we'd go in there and get our mince, and he loved the Houston's Wood Pit barbecue. And, we'd go and have our barbecue sandwiches, and it was just it was like a family. It was really so familial. And then I remember Mike was always good for what I call Andy Hardy pep talks. Judge Hardy to Mickey Rooney, Louis Stone and Mickey Rooney. And he came in. I was going through a terrible emotional relationship problem, and completely and totally distracted. And Mike came in, and the hand came down on the shoulder while my back was, on the hot splice. And he said, "Paul, we were going to promote you to assistant, and the pilot's coming in." There was a pilot coming in called The Queen and I with Larry Storch and a few other people, and I think it lasted a half a season, but we were going to promote you to assistant and everything. You were going to assist me, but you seem to be scattered these days. So I had to make a decision, work or the relationship. And it was the first time, but not the last, that I chose work over the relationship and let 3 relationships just go the way of all flesh, in order to do my work, get ahead, buckle under, and get it done.
Did you ever regret that?
No. I loved my film so terribly, and it's so funny when you verbalize or theorize certain things, like long before I ever saw or heard or read Dustin Hoffman refer to a movie as a baby, I always thought of them as my children. And when the networks would interfere terribly, which they did sometimes, I'd say, "Damn it, I don't want another thalidomide baby. Armless, legless, whatever." And they do this to movies. I can remember, can I name names? Yeah, John Erman on the phone with Ruth Slauson at NBC when they were just destroying a movie I did for John called Carolina Skeletons. Lou Gossett, and it was a good story and everything, and they were just shocked and horrified. And I heard him say, one wonders why they look at the dailies, they don't say anything. Prove the script, they don't say anything. Then suddenly they see it all put together, and they're shocked and horrified? Come on, grow up. And I mean, today, I have it on laser. I have it on VHS also. And one wonders why you made the movie in the first place, is a direct quote from John to Ruth. That was in the days when Ruth Slauson was there. Another, you wonder where their taste was. Excuse the expression, I'm not going to get vulgar. But Tony Masucci was another, just people feeding their egos and just destroying films for no reason.
Now, were you directly involved with that? I mean, were you hearing this, or would you actually go and also put in your 2 cents?
I can remember one movie that NBC almost destroyed, Lamont Johnson's Unnatural Causes. John Ritter, Alfre Woodard. Incredible film. I mean, it was truly a masterpiece. The end was this incredibly intricate optical that they did a couple of days, second unit in Washington, D.C., shooting the Vietnam Wall, the names, and they did right to left pans, left to right, up and downs, all kinds of slow motion. And we had tons of footage of Alfred Woodard on the switchboard taking calls from the vets. And, you superimpose. It was just exciting film, exciting footage. We had to lose the entire end because NBC had a show about the wall in progress. Just didn't make sense to destroy a movie because they had a movie in progress about the wall. And it was called The Wall. And then we had to lose a character midway who just disappears because we had to remove all mention of birth defects in babies because of exposure to Agent Orange. And, and Lamont was and Lamont wouldn't do it. I had to sit there at the chem and make these changes while an NBC executive swilled scotch from Standards and Practices. And I just wanted I wanted to punch him in the mouth. Some of the things he was saying, just so grand. Trim that and take that out. And
you had to do it? Could you say
I had to do it.
Did you say anything?
No. I tried as best I could. Lamont came back and, we screened the movie, and he said, well, they didn't hurt it that much. And I looked at him and I said, it's so sad. We were good buddies. And, it was sad, because the movie was, it was hurt, by 40%. 40% of the movie just wasn't there anymore. And it could have been an incredible movie, I loved Lamont, because he was so strong. We were editing in what used to be a film vault on the old RKO side of Paramount, and there was no heat in the entire building. And we kind of pussyfoot up to Hager's office and say, we're freezing to death. Get a space heater, for crying out loud. So you had to put a little electric thing in front of your toesies, and you move away from it, and you were freezing to death. Lamont came back from location in Yugoslavia. First day he's in that damn room. He says, Jesus Christ, it's cold in here. And he got us heat. They had a whole working crew down there putting heat in that building. It was just amazing, utterly amazing. And Michael Kahn was down the hall. He was doing a feature, Falling in Love, when I was working on Wallenberg. And it was just, I had nothing else to do. And Paul had been so terribly mean. Called me on a 4th of July weekend when he was ticked off because he didn't want me to do that miniseries. He wanted one of his...
Which one?
Wallenberg, A Hero's Story. It was a 4-hour about Raoul Wallenberg, who went to Budapest in 1944 and saved about 50,000 Jews from extinction, setting up safe houses and giving them what were called Schusspasses. And one of my best friends, who died of a heart attack last November, he would have been at the awards, was an infant survivor of the Holocaust, and his parents had one of those Schusspasses. They were in one of those safe houses. I don't want to talk about John because I miss it so much. Wow, I'm sorry. It just attacks me every once in a while. We're the same age, We used to joke about everything, And he was supposed to be at the awards presentation. He always believed in me. I can't get into that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You want to stop camera for a minute?
Nah, just.
Let's stop camera.
It was a real labor of love. I had friends. My best friend had just passed away in 1984. I had an agent who was just completely and totally out to lunch. Grace Lyons. She did nothing for me. She knew I desperately wanted Wallenberg. I hadn't worked in like 8 or 9 months. She sent a cover letter and a resume to Paul, and then she would never return my calls. So I called Lamont's office and spoke to one of his assistant directors, who was very nice to me. And he says, "Do you know anybody that knows Lamont?" And I said, "Possibly." I said, "I know Dan and Dorothea Petrie." He said, "Well, if you can get them to recommend you, there's a chance." And I could never do that. You know, I just hated playing favors. It's like I never asked Mike to get me a job. You know? It was always very, very difficult for me to beg or ask or, you know, be put in a position where, you know, I was needy. And I called and I spoke to Dorothea. And I said, "Do you know Lamont Johnson?" "Oh, sure, sure, sure." I said, "Do you think you can put in a word for me as far as Wallenberg's concerned?" I got a call the next day from Lamont's office. "When do you want to come in?" You know, it's got to be sometime either this afternoon or tomorrow, because they're going on location scouting. I drove with Lamont to the Bank of America on Melrose so he could get his per diems. By the time I got back to the studio, I had the job.
What do you think he saw in you?
I don't know. It's crazy because I had interviewed with him for Crisis at Central High several years earlier, and I didn't get the job. That was the one with Joanne Woodward. And I really wanted to work with him. I really respected him. And, you know, I had come off of a Marvin Chomsky film. I love Marvin, you know. But he said, "You got the job," just like that. Well, Paul was furious. Calls me on a Saturday, 4th of July weekend, basically calling me the dirty so-and-so, "How dare you, go behind my back, blah, 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 blah." He says, "You're going to work for illegally, 6 days a week, $1,600 a week." And at that time, I was making $1,500 for 5. And I bit my lip, and I said, "I'll take it." I was able to get $125 more out of Paramount about 3 or 4 months later, but still kind of underpaid for the effort I was putting into it. It was a labor of love. I had nothing else in my life at that time. One of my best friends had just died. So many of my friends were dropping like flies in those days, I had nothing to do but throw everything I could into my work.
Let's stop there to change.